It started as an ordinary day. The sun was shining, the neighborhood looked quiet and peaceful, and everything seemed normal. But then, a letter arrived that would change everything. It was from the Homeowners Association, or HOA, and the tone of the letter was cold, strict, and unexpected. The letter stated that there was a violation in the homeowner's yard. Something about the height of the grass, the style of the fence, and a few small details that had never been mentioned before. At first, it seemed like a small mistake, maybe a misunderstanding. Surely, the homeowner thought, this could be fixed quickly, and everything would return to normal. Days passed, but the homeowner noticed a growing tension. Other letters arrived, each one slightly harsher than the last. One mentioned a fine. Another threatened legal action if the issues were not corrected immediately. The homeowner began to feel a knot of anxiety forming in the chest. There had never been any complaints before. Neighbors were friendly, and life had been peaceful. But now, it felt as though every step, every decision about the house and yard was being watched and judged. It became clear that this was not just about a few small violations. This was about control. The homeowner tried to talk to the HOA. Emails were sent, phone calls made. Sometimes there was a response, but it was vague and unhelpful. Often, there was no response at all. Each time the homeowner tried to explain, to ask for clarification or leniency. The replies were formal, strict, and dismissive. There was no room for discussion. The letters kept coming, now with higher fines and more urgent warnings. The homeowner started to feel trapped in a system that had suddenly become overwhelming as the days went on. The homeowner noticed a change in the neighborhood. Conversations with neighbors became cautious. People who had been friendly before now seemed hesitant, almost fearful. It was as if the HOA's power extended beyond letters and fines. The mere mention of the association created tension, suspicion, and a sense of fear. Some neighbors whispered about past conflicts, about residents who had been forced to pay hundreds or even thousands of dollars in fines. Others avoided the topic completely, willing to share their stories for fear of retaliation. The homeowner spent long nights thinking about what had happened. How could a small neighborhood association have such power? It was hard to understand at first. The rules had been there from the beginning, yes, but no one had ever enforced them in such a harsh way. Now it seemed like every small detail could become a point of conflict. The homeowner felt the weight of this pressure constantly. Even simple tasks like mowing the lawn or trimming the bushes became stressful. Each action was scrutinized, each choice a potential problem. The anxiety started to seep into daily life, affecting sleep, concentration, and overall peace of mind. Neighbors occasionally offered support, but even that was cautious. They would nod politely, perhaps offer advice, but the fear of getting involved was strong. The homeowner realized that standing up alone might be necessary, but the thought was terrifying. What if fighting back only made things worse? The HOA seemed unstoppable. They had rules, fines, and the appearance of authority. They sent letters, held meetings, and had the power to enforce penalties. To question them felt risky. To ignore them seemed impossible. One morning, the homeowner found yet another letter slipped under the door. This one was different. The language was sharper, more threatening. It accused the homeowner of ignoring previous warnings and demanded immediate compliance. The fine had increased, and there was a clear message. Failure to comply would lead to further consequences, including legal action. The homeowner felt a mix of anger, fear, and disbelief. How could a few small issues escalate into something so serious? The sense of injustice was overwhelming, but there was also a spark of determination. Something inside refused to be bullied into submission. The homeowner began to pay closer attention to the HOA. Every meeting, every announcement, every letter was studied carefully. There was a growing realization that the association operated without transparency. Decisions were made quietly, often behind closed doors. Residents had little input, and enforcement seemed arbitrary. Some homeowners faced fines for minor issues, while others were ignored. It became clear that the power of the HOA was not based solely on rules, but on fear and control. Understanding this was the first step in breaking free from that fear. Daily life continued, but it was no longer peaceful. The homeowner noticed feelings of frustration building. Simple enjoyment of the home was clouded by anxiety. Even neighbors' casual comments felt weighted with potential judgment. The constant reminders of the HOA's authority created a tense environment. Yet amid the stress, there was also growing awareness. Knowledge about the system, about how the HOA operated, started to replace some of the fear. Questions began to form. Why were these rules enforced so strictly? Were all the fines and threats legally justified? Could anyone stand up to this kind of power? It was a strange mix of emotions. Fear, anger, confusion, and determination swirled together. The homeowner felt both small and yet resolute. There was a growing understanding that the letters, the fines, and the threats were just the surface. Behind them was a structure that relied on compliance and silence. If that could be challenged, if the power could be questioned, maybe there was a way forward. The first step was simply noticing that fear alone did not make the HOA's authority absolute. As weeks passed, the homeowner continued to receive notices. Each one seemed designed to provoke worry and urgency. Yet, each one also became a point of observation. By carefully tracking the language, timing, and content of the letters, patterns emerged. Some rules were enforced inconsistently. Some fines lacked proper documentation. Meetings were held without notice to all residents. The homeowner realized that this growing knowledge was a form of power. If the HOA believed their authority was absolute, that perception could be challenged with facts. Despite the stress, life went on. Work, family, and daily responsibilities continued. But there was an undercurrent of tension, a constant awareness of the association's presence. Every action had to be considered. Each choice in the yard or home felt like a potential risk. The neighborhood that had once felt safe and familiar now felt tense and controlled. The homeowner began to understand the psychology of the HOA's power. It relied on fear, uncertainty, and isolation. Breaking that hold would require patience, knowledge, courage. It was during this time that the homeowner began quietly talking to neighbors, though carefully. Small, cautious conversations revealed that others had experienced similar pressures. There were stories of fines that seemed unfair, rules enforced arbitrarily, and residents who had simply given up rather than fight. Hearing these stories, the homeowner felt a mix of relief and solidarity. The struggle was not personal alone. It was a shared experience. Yet the fear of retaliation remained strong. Every conversation had to be measured, every word chosen carefully. One night, after reading yet another threatening letter, the homeowner sat in the quiet of the living room and reflected. The fear was real, but so was the sense of injustice. The letters, the fines, and the constant scrutiny were designed to intimidate. But the homeowner realized that fear alone could not dictate actions forever. Something needed to change. The sense of powerlessness was painful, but it also revealed an opportunity. Knowledge, preparation, and careful observation could become tools to reclaim control. By the end of this first phase, the homeowner had transformed fear into awareness. The letters from the HOA no longer felt entirely overwhelming. Instead, they became information to analyze, patterns to study, and evidence to collect. The initial shock and intimidation had begun to shift into quiet determination. The sense of being threatened had laid the foundation for something stronger. The realization that the HOA's power was not absolute, and that with careful thought, action could be taken. This first encounter with threat planted the seed for what would come next. A journey from fear to understanding, from isolation to action, and eventually, from being threatened to triumphantly standing up to the system. The days after the first letters from the HOA became increasingly tense for the homeowner. What had started as a mild shock now turned into a constant pressure that hovered over every thought and action. The morning sunlight, once warm and comforting, now cast shadows that seemed heavier, as if reflecting the weight of the association's scrutiny. Each day felt like a careful balancing act, where a single misstep could result in another warning or fine. The homeowner began waking up in the middle of the night, thinking about how to comply with the rules while trying not to feel trapped. Sleep became a rare luxury, and even moments of peace were tinged with anxiety. It wasn't just the letters anymore. The HOA had begun inspecting the property more frequently. The homeowner noticed their neighbors' hushed conversations and sudden silences whenever the HOA board members were around. The inspections, which once seemed like polite checks, now felt like invasive intrusions. Every corner of the yard, every detail of the house, was examined with a critical eye. Even the paint color of the door or the angle of a mailbox could become a point of contention. The homeowner felt as if the sense of freedom and comfort that had once existed in their own home was slowly slipping away. Friends and family noticed the change. The homeowner, once relaxed and cheerful, had become tense and defensive. A simple story about mowing the lawn or planting flowers would turn into a report on the latest fines or HOA complaints. Meals were interrupted by the worry of whether a letter would arrive, and weekend plans were often canceled to address another sudden demand. The weight of constant pressure was exhausting. It felt as though the homeowner was walking on a thin line, where any misstep could trigger an overwhelming consequence. The fines began to accumulate. Each notice included a breakdown of amounts owed, and the total quickly grew to a number that felt impossible to pay. The homeowner began calculating the cost in every possible way, feeling the unfairness of being penalized repeatedly for minor infractions. Some rules were confusing or unclear, while others seemed selectively enforced. This inconsistency made the situation even more frustrating. How could something so arbitrary have such power over daily life? The homeowner could not understand, and it left a gnawing feeling of helplessness. Conversations with the HOA were even more frustrating than the letters themselves. When the homeowner called to ask for clarification, board members responded vaguely or redirected questions without real answers. Requests for meetings or explanations were often postponed or denied. It became evident that the HOA relied on a combination of bureaucracy and intimidation to maintain control. The homeowner realized that any attempt to argue, to explain, or to question the authority could be met with further punishment. The feeling of isolation was deepening. Despite these challenges, the homeowner refused to surrender completely. There was an inner resolve growing with each stressful encounter. Late at night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, the homeowner began researching every rule, bylaw, and legal document available. Every letter was analyzed, compared with state laws, and scrutinized for procedural mistakes. Slowly, a picture emerged that revealed inconsistencies and oversights. Some of the fines were not supported by proper notice. Some inspections were conducted without proper documentation. The homeowner realized that knowledge might be the first tool to fight back. Even if fear still lingered, neighbors began to cautiously share their own experiences. At first, it was just snippets. Someone had paid a fine for a fence that had been approved years earlier. Or another had received a letter for planting flowers in a way that violated vague aesthetic rules. These small confessions were whispered quietly, as though speaking too loudly could invite attention. Yet, for the homeowner, these stories provided both relief and strategy. The struggles were shared, and the patterns of the HOA's behavior became clearer. Fear alone did not control everyone. It was the lack of information and the isolation that made the association powerful. Life became a balancing act of compliance and preparation. The homeowner spent hours maintaining the yard and home according to every rule, checking every detail twice. At the same time, careful notes were taken on every interaction with the HOA, every letter, every meeting, and every inspection. Photographs documented the condition of the property. Receipts were organized and saved. The homeowner was transforming anxiety into action, turning helplessness into preparation. Each day became a careful combination of fulfilling obligations while quietly collecting evidence for a future challenge. The emotional toll was significant. The homeowner's patience was tested repeatedly. Minor mistakes, or even perceived mistakes, could trigger panic and stress. There were moments of despair when it seemed like the HOA's power was absolute. But each moment of stress also strengthened determination. The homeowner realized that living in fear meant losing control. while understanding the system and preparing for action could restore a sense of power. Even though the challenges were overwhelming, they began to feel like steps on a path toward a larger goal. As the homeowner learned more about the HOA, a strategy began to take shape. It was clear that the association thrived on fear, uncertainty, and isolation. Residents were too intimidated to question decisions, to attend meetings, or to stand up against fines. The homeowner recognized that challenging the HOA would require careful planning, clear documentation, and a strong support system. Knowledge alone was not enough. Confidence and courage were necessary. Every late night spent researching bylaws, every conversation with a neighbor, and every note taken during inspections became part of a larger plan. Despite the ongoing pressure, small victories emerged. A few letters were challenged and corrected, revealing errors in fines and procedural mistakes. These small successes were encouraging and demonstrated that the system could be questioned. The homeowner realized that the fear the HOA relied upon was not unbreakable, with evidence, preparation, and persistence. It was possible to push back, to stand firm, and to protect one's home and rights. Each victory, no matter how minor, reinforced the homeowner's determination to continue. As the pressure continued, the homeowner also discovered the psychological aspects of the HOA's tactics. Meetings were structured to intimidate. Language was chosen to convey authority, and silence was used to create uncertainty. Understanding these methods allowed the homeowner to respond calmly and strategically, rather than reacting emotionally. Awareness of these techniques became a shield, reducing the immediate stress and preparing for long-term action. The homeowner realized that power was not just in rules and fines, but in perception and control. By breaking the perception of absolute authority, change became possible. Through all these challenges, the homeowner's sense of self and purpose strengthened. What began as a simple battle to comply with arbitrary rules became a deeper fight for fairness, justice, and personal dignity. The home was no longer just a place to live. It had become a battleground for independence and autonomy. The pressure of fines, inspections, and threats had forced the homeowner to think strategically, gather knowledge, and build resilience. In the process, fear was slowly transforming into courage and determination. As the second phase of the struggle came to a close, the homeowner had gained a clear understanding of the HOA's methods, its inconsistencies, and its weaknesses. The fear that had dominated daily life was being replaced by focus and resolve. Preparation, careful observation, and quiet investigation had become the tools of resistance. The stage was set for the next phase, where knowledge and strategy would be used to confront the association directly. The homeowner had learned that while the HOA could threaten and intimidate, its power was not absolute. With courage, information, and persistence, change was possible, and the journey from pressure to triumph was beginning to take shape. By the time the homeowner reached the third stage of this struggle, a new determination had taken root. The fear that had dominated the first encounters was now tempered by knowledge and observation. Each letter, each inspection, each conversation with the HOA became an opportunity to understand the system more deeply. The homeowner realized that to reclaim control, it was necessary to look beyond the surface, to see not just the rules, but how they were applied and enforced. Late nights were spent reviewing old letters, documenting every incident and comparing the HOA's actions against bylaws and state regulations. The homeowner discovered inconsistencies that had previously gone unnoticed. Some fines were improperly issued. Some rules were enforced selectively, targeting certain homeowners while ignoring others. Some procedures required by the HOA's own bylaws were skipped entirely. With each discovery, the homeowner felt a mix of relief and empowerment. The system that had seemed untouchable was beginning to show cracks. Armed with evidence, the homeowner began paying closer attention to the HOA's behavior in meetings. Previously, meetings had been intimidating, filled with authority and silence from the members. Now, with careful observation, it became clear that not all members were confident in their actions. Some seemed uncertain, hesitant when asked detailed questions. Some relied on vague language to avoid explaining decisions. The homeowner noted each reaction, each inconsistency, understanding that these small signals could become leverage in future challenges. Neighborhood conversations became more purposeful. Carefully, the homeowner started asking neighbors about their experiences, listening for patterns of fines, inspections, and threats. Some residents had stories of fines that were never properly explained. Others had been ignored even when they followed the rules perfectly. Gradually, a map of the HOA's weaknesses was forming. The homeowner realized that these patterns were not coincidences. They were opportunities. Where fear had once isolated residents, shared experiences were now creating a foundation for collective understanding. Documentation became a central part of daily life. Every notice was saved, every interaction noted, and every inspection photographed. The homeowner developed a detailed record of the HOA's actions, organized by date and type. Each piece of evidence felt like a shield, reducing the power of intimidation. What had been stressful and chaotic was now structured and controlled. By approaching the situation methodically, the homeowner felt a sense of agency returning. The fear that had been overwhelming was gradually replaced by clarity and purpose. Small victories reinforced confidence. A minor fine was challenged and successfully reversed after the homeowner presented clear documentation of compliance. Another inspection revealed procedural mistakes, which the homeowner documented and raised in the next meeting. Each time the HOA was confronted with facts, hesitation appeared. The authority that had seemed absolute was not infallible. The homeowner began to understand that power depended not just on rules, but on perception, fear, and silence. When challenged intelligently, it could be questioned, weakened, and even overturned. The homeowner also began preparing for formal challenges. Letters were drafted carefully, citing specific rules, bylaws, and legal requirements. Meetings were attended with notebooks in hand, ready to document everything. The approach was calm, factual, and deliberate. Emotional reactions were avoided because they could be used against the homeowner. Instead, every action was strategic, aimed at exposing inconsistencies and holding the HOA accountable. The homeowner realized that patience and preparation were essential. Quick reactions or impulsive arguments would not succeed. As this process continued, the psychological impact of fear began to fade. The homeowner had learned to recognize the tactics used to intimidate threatening language, selective enforcement, vague rules, and isolation. By identifying these tactics, the homeowner could respond without panic. Confidence grew with each action, and the homeowner felt stronger and more capable. Even small successes like correcting a minor fine or documenting a missed procedure had a significant effect on morale. The system was no longer mysterious or untouchable. Support from neighbors, though cautious, became more meaningful. The homeowner shared observations carefully, encouraging others to document their own experiences. Gradually, a quiet network of understanding formed. Residents who had once been afraid to speak were now willing to share stories and advice in private. The realization that the fear was manufactured and that it could be challenged collectively provided strength. The homeowner was no longer alone, and the growing awareness of shared experiences laid the groundwork for organized action. Throughout this stage, the homeowner's daily routine was influenced by both preparation and resistance. Mornings began with careful inspections of the yard, ensuring compliance with existing rules while documenting conditions. Calls and emails were answered thoughtfully, leaving a record of every interaction. Even seemingly minor actions were approached strategically, by controlling as much as possible within the household and maintaining detailed records. The homeowner established a sense of control that had been absent in the early stages. The psychological burden began to lighten as actions replaced anxiety. As the homeowner's knowledge deepened, opportunities to confront the HOA with facts became more apparent. Specific violations in the board's procedures were noted. Instances of selective enforcement were documented, and evidence of improperly issued fines accumulated. The homeowner prepared to bring these findings forward strategically, ensuring that every challenge would be grounded in law, procedure, and evidence. Confidence was no longer based on hope or desire, but on careful preparation. The The homeowner had become a meticulous observer and strategist, turning fear into a tool for action. Throughout this period, the homeowner's resolve was tested repeatedly. The HOA continued to send letters, conduct inspections, and issue fines. Some actions were designed to provoke anxiety, to test whether the homeowner would respond impulsively. But with preparation and awareness, these tactics were met calmly. Each response was deliberate, measured, and documented. The homeowner recognized that controlling emotions was as important as controlling the house and yard. Each calm and reasoned interaction weakened the perception of the HOA's omnipotence. By the end of this phase, the homeowner had achieved a level of mastery over the situation that had been unimaginable at the start. Fear had been replaced with clarity. Confusion was replaced with understanding. Isolation was replaced with knowledge of neighbors' experiences and the foundation for collective action. The homeowner had learned that power was not inherent in rules or fines alone, but in perception, fear, and silence. By exposing inconsistencies and documenting everything, the homeowner had begun to dismantle that perception, setting the stage for direct confrontation and eventual triumph. The third phase of the struggle had transformed the homeowner. From a passive target of intimidation into an active strategist, every piece of evidence collected, every inconsistency noted, and every neighbor consulted became part of a larger plan. The sense of control returned, and with it came confidence that change was possible. The homeowner was ready to take the next steps, moving from understanding and preparation to action. The journey from fear to triumph was gaining momentum, and the first real cracks in the HOA's power were becoming visible. The homeowner had turned observation into knowledge, and knowledge into a quiet but undeniable form of strength. The homeowner had spent weeks gathering evidence, documenting inconsistencies, and understanding the inner workings of the HOA. Every interaction, every letter, every inspection had been studied carefully, and now a plan had formed. This was no longer just about responding to threats or fines. It was about taking action, challenging the unfair authority, and exposing the weaknesses that had gone unnoticed for too long. The first step was strategic communication. The homeowner drafted clear, factual letters, addressing each violation or fine. Each letter cited specific bylaws, referenced state laws, and included photographs, receipts, and dates to provide clear evidence of compliance. The tone was calm and professional, but firm. There was no room for the HOA to dismiss the information or claim ignorance. The homeowner sent the letters methodically, keeping copies of every communication. This careful documentation created a paper trail that could not be ignored simultaneously. The homeowner began attending HOA meetings with a renewed sense of purpose. In the past, these meetings had been intimidating, with board members speaking with authority while residents stayed silent. Now, armed with evidence and a plan, the homeowner sat with notebooks, photographs, and carefully prepared questions. Each point was raised thoughtfully, backed by documentation. When a board member tried to respond vaguely or deflect, the homeowner calmly referred back to the records, showing inconsistencies and errors. The shift in energy was noticeable. Board members who once appeared confident now hesitated. Realizing that their actions were being scrutinized, neighborhood support began to grow. The homeowner quietly shared insights with trusted neighbors, encouraging them to document their own experiences and attend meetings. Slowly, more residents began to participate. Where fear had once silenced them, knowledge and preparation gave them courage. Meetings that had been one-sided and intimidating were now becoming forums, where questions could be asked and accountability was demanded. The homeowner's careful strategy had inspired others, creating a ripple effect that began to weaken the HOA's control. One particularly tense meeting highlighted the changing dynamics. The board had called for an inspection dispute hearing, expecting compliance and silence. Instead, the homeowner presented a thorough record showing that the inspection had been conducted improperly and that fines had been applied incorrectly. Photographs, receipts, and correspondence were displayed, leaving no room for argument. Board members attempted to defend their actions. The homeowner remained calm and precise, citing bylaws and state regulations. The atmosphere shifted. confidence among the board wavered. And other residents watched with surprise and hope. The homeowner also discovered that the HOA had relied on selective enforcement to maintain fear. Some neighbors had been penalized repeatedly for minor issues, while others had faced no consequences for the same actions. By documenting these discrepancies, the homeowner highlighted a pattern of unfair treatment. This evidence was presented in subsequent meetings and shared cautiously with other residents. The perception that the HOA's authority was absolute began to erode, replaced by awareness that fairness and transparency were possible if people stood together. Legal preparation became another key element. The homeowner researched state laws and HOA regulations, understanding residents' rights and the proper procedures the board was required to follow. When letters or fines failed to meet legal requirements, the homeowner responded with citations and references, making it clear that further violations could have consequences for the HOA itself. This knowledge provided both protection and leverage, demonstrating that the board's power was not unchecked. The homeowner had turned from a passive target into a strategic player in a system that had once felt overwhelming. Confidence grew with each successful challenge. Small victories like reversing a fine or correcting a procedural error became motivating milestones. They also sent a message to the HOA. Compliance through intimidation alone was no longer effective. Each victory was shared carefully with neighbors, further inspiring collective awareness. The homeowner understood that true change would not come from one person alone. It required building a community of informed, courageous residents who were willing to question unfair authority. The homeowner also employed careful observation during meetings. Body language, hesitation, and inconsistent statements from board members were noted. Every detail was documented, providing additional evidence of weakness and mismanagement. The homeowner realized that authority often depended on the appearance of confidence and certainty. When that facade was challenged with facts and preparation, cracks became visible. This insight became a key strategy in future confrontations, ensuring that each action was calculated and effective. As the homeowner continued to act strategically, the HOA attempted to push back. New letters arrived, some with increased fines and more urgent threats. But this time, the homeowner was prepared. Each letter was analyzed, compared with previous documentation, and met with calm, factual responses. Rather than succumbing to anxiety or reacting impulsively, the homeowner used these communications as opportunities to further demonstrate errors, inconsistencies, and improper enforcement. The HOA's tactics, designed to intimidate, were being neutralized through preparation and persistence. By the end of this phase, the balance of power had shifted. The homeowner had demonstrated that the board could be questioned, that evidence and preparation mattered, and that fear could be replaced by strategy. Neighbors previously hesitant began attending meetings, asking questions, and sharing their experiences. The atmosphere in the community was changing. Where once the HOA's presence had created tension and silence, it now sparked scrutiny and cautious engagement. The homeowner had transformed from a passive resident living in fear to an active, strategic, and empowered individual. Each action, each document, each carefully prepared response contributed to a growing sense of control. The HOA's authority, once seemingly absolute, was now under pressure. The homeowner had proven that rules alone did not grant power. Preparation, knowledge, and courage were equally important. The stage was set for the final phase, where the homeowner's efforts would culminate in a decisive challenge that reshaped the balance of authority in the community. Triumph was on the horizon, and the homeowner was ready to see the journey through to the end. The homeowner had come a long way since the first intimidating letters from the HOA. What had started as fear and confusion had evolved into preparation, strategy, and quiet confidence. Now, after weeks of careful documentation, research, and subtle planning, the final phase had arrived at the phase where action would meet opportunity and the homeowner would confront the HOA directly to reclaim control and restore fairness. The homeowner began by scheduling a meeting with the HOA board, requesting a full review of all fines, violations, and procedural actions. The request was precise and formal, citing state laws and the association's bylaws. Copies of all prior communications, photographs, and evidence of compliance were prepared to present. The homeowner's goal was clear: expose inconsistencies, demand accountability, and show that the power the board wielded through intimidation was not absolute. When the day of the meeting arrived, there was a palpable tension in the room. Board members, who had once projected confidence, now looked uneasy. They had seen the careful preparation, the documentation, and the growing involvement of neighbors. The homeowner, calm and composed, presented each issue methodically, referencing evidence and legal requirements. Questions were asked, and when evasive answers were given, they were gently but firmly challenged with facts. The atmosphere shifted from intimidation to scrutiny. With every word and gesture examined by all present, neighbors who had quietly observed began to feel emboldened. Some spoke up, sharing experiences of fines and inspections that had felt unfair or arbitrary. Their voices added weight to the homeowner's evidence, showing a consistent pattern rather than isolated incidents. Board members found it increasingly difficult to defend their actions. Attempts to deflect or downplay concerns were met with organized, factual responses. For the first time, the HOA's authority felt fragile, vulnerable to the scrutiny and knowledge of informed residents. The homeowner highlighted procedural errors that had been overlooked or ignored, meetings that lacked proper notice, fines applied without documented violations. Selective enforcement of rules were presented clearly. Photographs, letters, and notes provided undeniable evidence. Board members who had once appeared untouchable now hesitated. Realizing that the homeowner's preparation left no room for ambiguity, each error exposed weakened the perception of absolute control, making it clear that fear and intimidation were not enough to maintain authority. As the meeting continued, the homeowner carefully maintained a calm and professional demeanor. Emotions, once overwhelming during the early encounters, were now managed and used strategically. Confidence and composure became tools of influence. Every question answered, every violation documented, every neighbor's account shared reinforced the homeowner's position. The board could no longer rely on silence or uncertainty. Accountability had replaced fear. In addition to the meeting, the homeowner continued to communicate with residents. Letters and emails were sent carefully,
summarizing the findings and explaining the process for challenging fines or violations.
The homeowner encouraged neighbors to document their experiences and attend meetings. Slowly, a culture of awareness and participation emerged. Fear that had previously silenced the community began to dissipate. Where residents had once felt powerless, they now realized that preparation and knowledge could shift the balance of authority. The HOA attempted to counter by issuing new fines and warnings, but these were met with immediate documented responses. Each communication was analyzed, compared with prior evidence, and challenged where appropriate. The homeowner had created a system of checks and accountability. The association's attempts to intimidate were no longer effective because each action was met with informed resistance. Board members began to recognize that the homeowner and the growing network of residents were capable of holding them accountable. Small victories continued to accumulate. A fine that had been wrongly applied was reversed. Procedural errors were acknowledged, and meetings were adjusted to provide proper notice. The homeowner's meticulous documentation and strategic communication made it impossible for the HOA to continue with the same level of unchecked authority. Each success reinforced confidence and demonstrated that the rules of fairness and transparency could prevail when residents were informed and organized. The final turning point came when the HOA board was forced to convene a special meeting to address growing concerns and public scrutiny. The homeowner, prepared with extensive records and supported by neighbors, presented a comprehensive account of the board's mismanagement. The board could no longer hide behind intimidation. Evidence and collective awareness made transparency unavoidable. The community witnessed a clear shift in power. Where once residents felt fearful and voiceless, they now had a clear understanding that rules were meant to protect, not punish arbitrarily. During this meeting, the homeowner's strategy of calm, evidence-based presentation reached its peak. Every question posed by the board was met with clear documentation. Every attempt to assert authority without justification was countered with facts. Board members, once intimidating, appeared frustrated and hesitant. Their inability to defend arbitrary actions in the face of clear evidence highlighted the effectiveness of the homeowner's approach. Residents who had been silent now voiced support and shared additional documentation. Further reinforcing the homeowner's position, by the end of this meeting, the balance of power had shifted decisively. The HOA was forced to acknowledge procedural errors, retract fines, and commit to transparent enforcement of rules going forward. Key board members resigned or were replaced by residents committed to fairness and accountability. The homeowner had not only defended their own rights, but had sparked a transformation within the community. The authority that had relied on fear was replaced with one that depended on fairness and transparency. And the neighborhood found a renewed sense of trust and cooperation. The homeowner reflected on the journey, recognizing how far they had come. What had begun with fear and helplessness had transformed into knowledge, strategy, and empowerment. Each letter analyzed, each inspection documented, and each neighbor consulted had contributed to this triumph. The sense of victory was not just personal, it was communal. The community as a whole had grown stronger, more informed, and capable of standing up to unfair authority. Daily life gradually returned to normal, but it was imbued with a new sense of control and confidence. Homeowners felt safe to maintain their properties without fear of arbitrary fines. Meetings became forums for discussion and problem-solving rather than intimidation. The HOA's rules, once a source of anxiety, were now applied fairly and transparently. The homeowner had achieved more than just a personal victory. The power dynamic within the neighborhood had been reshaped. The story of the homeowner's triumph spread quietly among neighbors and the broader community. It became a reminder that authority is not absolute, and that preparation, documentation, and calm persistence can challenge even the most intimidating systems. Fear alone is not enough to control those who are informed and organized. The homeowner had turned a situation of threat and pressure into an opportunity for empowerment and change. Looking back, the homeowner recognized the critical lessons learned throughout the journey. First, knowledge is power. Understanding rules, regulations, and legal rights provides the foundation to confront injustice. Second, preparation is essential. Documenting every interaction and maintaining careful records creates a shield against arbitrary authority. Third, calm and strategic action is more effective than emotional reactions. Finally, community matters. Individual courage is strengthened when shared with others who are willing to participate and support fairness. The homeowner's journey from threat to triumph was a testament to resilience, intelligence, and perseverance. It demonstrated that even in the face of a powerful system designed to intimidate, a methodical approach based on facts, preparation, and courage can lead to meaningful change. What began as fear and uncertainty had transformed into confidence and control. The homeowner had not only protected their home and rights, but it also inspired a community to reclaim its voice. In the end, the homeowner's story became a lasting example of how ordinary individuals can challenge authority and succeed when armed with knowledge, strategy, and a commitment to fairness. The neighborhood, once silenced by fear, emerged stronger and more united. The HOA's power, once threatening and absolute, was replaced by transparency, accountability, and respect for residents. Triumph had been achieved not through confrontation alone, but through careful planning, patience, and unwavering determination.